Everyone.
Good morning.
I hope you have been blessed so far by the study and the music.
Amen.
I want to start by asking you a question. Why are you here? Maybe in the simple sense, like why are you sitting in that chair? And maybe taking it to more of the broader sense, is why have you decided that sitting in that chair is important to you at 11:25 January 30?
Amen.
Why are you here? You may not have thought of it this way, or maybe you have, but every decision you've ever made in your whole life has led you to this point. To sitting in that chair, listening to some guy, and you're trying to figure out where he's going. We'll get there. Maybe some of those decisions were good, maybe some of them were bad. So another quick question, I want to take a quick poll. How many of you were born into the church? Okay, that's what I thought. About 25%. So I assume the rest of you came in later. Okay, that's kind of what I was thinking. But there's a trend that's been going on for a while that seems to be accelerating. The trend is to leave instead of coming in. Now, we can talk for hours and hours and hours about why that might be, whether it's, church isn't exciting enough. We can blame the media, video games, the internet. Maybe the church feels closed-minded, not open to new ideas, stuck in the past. The hypocrisy people have seen in leadership, and they just had enough. They're done. But I don't want to spend too much time on that today. I want to talk about the other aspect. Why am I here, standing before you? What led me to this point? The different influences and decisions and experience that I've had that have led me here. So I want to share with you my testimony today. It might be a little bit different than what you're used to, because I can't say that I've ever heard a testimony like mine. Because normally when you think of a testimony, you think of somebody steeped in evil, drugs, alcohol, all that. Christ turned their life around, and they're here, a sinner saved by grace. And those are amazing and powerful. And I don't want to discount that. Those are incredible stories. I don't have a story like that. My story is boring. But like I said, I don't really know that I've heard one like mine. And I think that's why, because it sounds boring. I didn't go off to check out the world and then decide to come back later because I found it was better. I haven't been to any far-off lands to share the gospel with some primitive tribe that I can tell you about with a language that I don't speak. So I've always tried to let God kind of lead me in what I should share when I get up here. This is what He led me to share. I hope this can be an encouragement to you, and you can learn something from my, quote, boring life. But maybe you're the person that needs to hear this story today. So, it was a Friday, early morning, Houston, Texas. I came into this world. I spent my first Sabbath in the hospital. Went home in the front seat of my mother's Camaro Z28 because the car seat wouldn't fit in the back seat. And Mom was in the back seat. So spent my first Sabbath in the hospital, the next Sabbath at the Houston Northwest SDA Church. Because my parents understood the importance of getting me to church and teach me about Jesus, because the will is formed so much more quickly than we think. I want to give you a quick little funny story on how my parents tried to implement this shaping of the will. So, if any point during the service I was being disruptive and not listening or playing with my quiet things, my coloring book, my dad would take me right out there. We would sit on the steps under the lean-to there. Emphasis on set, not play, not run around. We would set in a loving bear hug. I quickly learned that it was much more fun to be in church where I could have my quiet playthings than to be out there stuck to my dad's lap. So even though I didn't realize it at the time, my parents were shaping my will to a life of surrender to Christ. Child Guidance, page 82 says, "But let selfishness, anger, and self-will have their course for the first 3 years of a child's life, and it will be hard to bring it to submit to wholesome discipline. Its disposition has become soured. It delights in having its own way. Parental control is distasteful. These evil tendencies grow with its growth, until in manhood, supreme selfishness and a lack of self-control place him at the mercy of the evils that run riot in our land." 3 years old. That's a lot of pressure. And as some of you may know, but my wife and I are expecting this summer, and I've been going through Child Guidance, and when I read that, started to sweat a little bit. 3 years, huh? Okay, let's rock and roll. So another very important thing early on in my life was Sabbath school class. Now, if you haven't been to the kids' Sabbath school class in a while, it is much different than up here. Don't step on any toes, but up here is kind of boring. There's much more singing downstairs. Songs like, "Jesus loves me," "This little light of mine," "He's able," "Dare to be a Daniel," "Give me oil in my lamp, I've got peace like a river." You remember those songs? Amen. "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine." All around the neighborhood. "Hide it under a bushel." No. Simple, valuable little lessons that a little kid can understand. And my mom always said, just when you're getting tired of singing the songs, the kids are getting into them. I don't know how many of you remember the Plant a Seed VHS videos my mom got for the church way back. I think they're still downstairs somewhere. But we would watch them, and my mom didn't think they were doing too much good until one day she heard me singing the song at home. And she knew those songs had gotten to that little head of mine. They were doing something on my subconscious brain. Deuteronomy 6:5-7, "And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I commanded thee this day shall be in thy heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thy house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." This is what my parents did for me. There wasn't an opportunity that was left where they weren't pointing me to God. It wasn't, we do church at church and we do home at home. There wasn't a whole lot of difference. Yeah, like I said, the involvement didn't end at church. my parents decided to take the big step of homeschooling my brother and I. Now, it takes a lot of devotion to homeschool your child, because I was not always the best child. I was pretty good most of the time, but there were some trying times. But it takes a lot of patience, and they continued this up all the way through high school. Your heart has to be in it, otherwise you won't make it. It's too hard. And I'm ever grateful for that they chose to do that. It was easy to see how much they cared for me because of how much time they spent with me. Mom was the teacher, Dad was the principal. And it worked out pretty good that way. I remember all those reading lessons that my brother and I wanted to rewrite the English language because all the rules didn't make any sense. And the math that was difficult to understand. They also encouraged me with my music. Some might call it forcing me to practice. But to be honest, I didn't, at that 7 years old when I started, I didn't really understand that quitting was actually an option. They didn't let me quit, but it taught me perseverance and how to stick with something. So when I was 8 or so, excuse me a second. When I was 8 years old or so, you'll have to bear with me here. The cassette tape is the oldest audio form that I have ever interacted with. So it may not be that old to some of you, but to me, that's what I grew up with, cassette tapes. My parents were given a set of cassette tapes by this ministry, and they were unlike anything we'd ever heard before. And we decided we needed to check that out. So they've got a series of camp meetings they had around the country. They had 4 or 5 at that time. But the first year we didn't go. I was 8, Neil was 6. But you know why we didn't go? They didn't have any kids meetings. What are an 8 and 6-year-old going to do in a bunch of grown-up adult meetings? They're going to be bored. So we didn't go. But the Angers did, though, and they gave us a very good report. So they were worried. But so the next year, we loaded up the single cab truck, all 4 of us, with the pop-up. We drove the 10 hours to the Adventist camp up there in Indiana, and it rained almost the whole time. But more importantly, what we heard was something different than we had ever heard before. We heard messages focused on practical Christianity, family living, or family life and country living. Not the mark of the beast, the 2,300 days, or whatever the signs of the times happened to be in those days. I had heard all that before. They talked about how to surrender the will on a moment-by-moment basis. They gave practical lessons on how to be a good parent and have a good marriage. They talked about the importance of spending time with your family. They talked about cutting out the good and better things in your life so you could only have the best. You know, my mom mentioned to me, not too long ago actually, we were talking about Adventist Home and how she had read it in college. She's like, I had never seen anyone live like that until I went to this camp meeting. And people actually do it. But the part I was most excited about, I heard at these meetings, there was freeze tag. Now, we haven't done this in a long time, but when we were little, after prayer meeting, we'd go right out there, and we'd have a freeze tag game for about 10 minutes while the parents talked in here, and we just thought that was the greatest time. So I thought a whole big group of people playing freeze tag, that's got to be awesome. But this was a different kind of freeze tag. They call it family freeze tag. Now, if I were to ask you what age group of people generally plays freeze tag, What would you say? Little kids, thank you. Thank you. It's not a trick question. Little kids at recess and stuff like that. But it's family freeze tag. You had everyone from itty bitty babies to grandparents out on the freeze tag field. Now, to a 9-year-old watching their parents run around in a field like an idiot, that was just the greatest thing. But driving back home, my parents asked me, or they've asked both of us, Neil and I, did I enjoy it? Did I get bored? You know, there were no kids meetings, remember? I said no. I didn't get bored. I really liked it. I want to come back next year. And I said, why? They said, because they tell stories and don't use big words I can't understand. You see, at the ripe old age of 9, I could connect with the stories that they were telling about their everyday life and how the battle with self was real for everyone. By this point, I had 9 years old. I had sat through a whole bunch of sermons, probably a prophecy seminar or two. I had a rudimentary understanding of Daniel and Revelation. I was used to hearing words like sanctification and justification, but I didn't understand how that was supposed to help me be a better Christian. How was that supposed to help me not get mad at my brother when he did something I didn't like? Their stories made sense, and I could relate to them. So this began a long journey with this ministry that still continues to this day, 20 years later. So one of the things we picked up from the first family camp that we went to was the concept of family time. Now, if you're not sure what family time is, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's spending time with your family. But this was a specific, usually about an hour. Most evenings after Dad would come home, we would take turns picking what we wanted to do. Usually it was something fun, but it didn't have to be. Whether it would be playing catch in the yard or basketball, or usually Mom would pick projects. But to me, as a little kid, it showed me that my life was important to my parents. That it was more important than whatever else they needed to do. They established that relationship with me early on. Because as you get older, it's much easier to accept counsel and guidance from someone you have respect and love for than an outsider, someone who doesn't feel connected to your life. And we'll get down to that more here in a second. Through my teen years, I was very involved with Pathfinders. Again, my mom eventually did become the Pathfinder director. So again, still very involved in the life, making sure that they knew everything that was going on. It gave me a good chance to interact with lots of youth in the church outside of the typical church setting, and also across the Iowa Missouri Conference. I enjoyed my time in Pathfinders very much, but honestly, I can't say that played a significant role. It had some in why I'm here. Moving on later, graduated from high school. Time to go to college, right? Now this is the homeschool kid, right? Everybody asked me, how did you handle the transition from homeschool to college? It's like, well, I just did what my teachers told me, and it all worked out all right. So after deciding, we decided that I would go to Southern Adventist University in Collegedale, Tennessee, to pursue my dream of becoming a physical therapist. Now, my senior year of high school, I had actually gone down to Crowder. I had to do some dual credits, which actually helped me out, saved me a year at college, which was really nice. A lot of money. Thanks, Dad. Or you're welcome, Dad. But even though I came in as a sophomore on credits, they still made me go to freshman orientation. Imagine that. So they pulled us in there for 2 days. We had to come early before all the other people because we had to go to the orientation. But they told us what Southern was all about, and rah rah, go Southern. But what I spent a lot of the time on was how to manage your time, how to study, and that the biggest predictor of succeeding in college was going to class. I thought to myself, kind of, duh. So I called my dad up after listening to 2 days of this, like, they hadn't really told me anything you hadn't already told me. He said, well, that may be true, but they've got letters behind their name. Whatever that means, sometimes that doesn't mean a whole lot. But my parents had drilled into me what I needed to do to succeed at that next level. So, one thing that is maybe a little bit misconstrued is that at an Adventist institution, all activities become sanctified. And let me explain what that means. So you would assume you're at an Adventist school, you have Adventist professors, you have Adventist classmates, everything is sanctified and holy, which is not always the case. But back when I was at Crowder, see, my defenses were up, because if anybody had any extracurricular activities, I just assumed that there's probably something I didn't want to be involved with, so I tried to stay as disconnected as possible and not really get involved, and just go to school and come home. So one thing I did get caught up in a little bit of issue in this was when I was in Tennessee, there's lots of places to go rock climbing. Now, most of the rocks were a little ways, 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, from Southern. So it took a considerable amount of time to get there. So what would normally happen, you'd find a group of friends and you'd go on Sunday or something. But that would take a lot of study time. So what many of my friends did, they would go climbing on Sabbath. Now, initially, I thought, nope, that's not a good idea. I don't think I should be climbing on Sabbath. Now, maybe it was okay for them, but it wasn't for me, which we'll get to a little bit more in a second. But I began to mull this over, and it's like, maybe it's not so bad. You're in nature. So I did. I went climbing a few times, and even a couple times, I went to the early service at church, skipped out on Sabbath school, and went for the hills to find the mountains. Now, I'm not proud of that decision, but that's what happened. What one of my friends had told me is that, well, you're out in nature, you're fellowshipping with God, it's kind of like church. Well, maybe that worked for him, but the way my mind works, that can't work for me. Because when I get involved in a strenuous activity like that, everything goes out the window. I'm not focusing on being in God's nature. I'm not focusing on God. I'm focusing on the task ahead of me. Then I bring up this story to show you, I thought I was good enough. I wouldn't be swayed to break any of my principles. That I could withstand. I'm good. I have a good Adventist background. I'll be okay. But this idea of creeping compromise. So I've since vowed to guard my Sabbath activities a little bit more carefully. Since then. So it's very important who we surround ourselves with and what we allow to be influenced by. Overall, my experience at Southern was a very good one. I met a lot of good friends who I'm still friends with to this day. Now, one of the positive things was I was actually introduced to this group of people by my future sister-in-law. I didn't know that at the time. But there was a very good group, and they had this thing called testimony studies. So about 6 o'clock on Friday evening, they would have this meeting at this one gentleman's house, and we were reading through the testimonies, and then we'd head all over to Vespers, the campus-wide Vespers. And here I got to meet some very godly and uplifting people. These were the people that were taking me in the right direction and not dragging me down the other way. So I am very thankful that I found these people. And I don't think I would have found them without my sister-in-law, because they were never around campus. They were a little bit older typically, and they were off campus. They were never in the cafeteria. So outside of this, I hardly ever saw them. But that just goes to show you, if you want to find godly young people, you can find that. And if you want to get into trouble, you can find that too. It's all about what you're looking for. Amen. So after I graduated from Southern, I went up to the frozen tundra that is Berrien Springs to attend Andrews University, our flagship institution. Now, I don't have the same experience quite with Southern. Being a graduate student, our building was on the side of campus. We didn't go anywhere. Nobody came to us, so I don't totally have from the undergraduate perspective on that whole side. But one of the best series I attended there was by David Astrick. He's probably a lot of you have heard of him, but the series was entitled "This Is My Church." It had the punctuation was left blank. He said, maybe this is my church, period. Maybe it's a question mark, or maybe it's an exclamation point. Because he was speaking to mostly people like me, people who had been in the church for a long time, their whole life. So on the first night, he made the comment that at every point in an Adventist life, you look at all the 28 fundamental beliefs, the prophecies and everything, and you go, that makes sense. That's nice. But it kind of ends there. Like, what does it mean beyond that? So the goal for that week was to dismantle what they called the table of truth. State is dead, prophecy, great controversy, all that stuff. That's on your table of truth. And he says sometimes when we try to witness, we try to take this table of truth and we shove it in people's faces. And they don't know what to do with it. It's just so much information that doesn't really relate to their life. And this really resonated with me because growing up, this is a lot how I had felt. It appealed to me on an intellectual level. It's like, well, of course that makes sense because the Bible says it. But I didn't totally understand how that made me a better Christian. I knew all the right Adventist buzzwords like the Great Controversy, the Investigative Judgment, the Mark of the Beast, Daniel 2, and haystacks. But I didn't know how it all came together to point to what he called the ultimate truth, that being that God is love. Amen. He put forth the idea that all these truths, he called them lowercase t, should point to the truth, uppercase T, which that is God is love. These are all different lenses and angles to view how God is love. And it just totally revolutionized my whole upbringing. And it just left me like, wow, I never thought of it that way before. It's a very good series, by the way. You can look it up on YouTube. I even get a shout out in one of the meetings. But even after I kind of left my scholastic career, God is still continuing to work on me. Even though I grew up in the church, had very good parents, I had a good education, that doesn't mean I've figured it all out yet. But let's be honest here for a second. The real reason a young man goes to an Adventist university is to find a wife. But fortunately, that didn't work out for me. Because This is one area where God has really, really been picking at my heart, because I thought I had my life planned out. I knew what I wanted to do. I had a stable family. I had a stable spiritual background. I knew where I was going to school. I went to school. I graduated, got a job. Everything was great. Didn't have a whole lot of uncertainty there, but girls were not that way. It's a little more complicated. I thought if I tried hard enough and I acted good enough, I could get a good Christian girl to like me, then we'd get married, and everything would be just hunky-dory. But then, again, that goes back to me. I'm good enough. I can do it. God, I don't need your help. I can find a good one. So, yeah. So I pushed ahead without really God's blessing on a couple different situations. And if I would have opened up myself to God's leading and my parents' counsel, I could have saved myself from some heartache and trouble. But looking back, I think the reason that I didn't allow God to lead me is because I knew from the very beginning that they probably weren't the one. But remember, I was good enough. I could do it myself. So I kind of hardened my heart, like Pharaoh a little bit. I knew everything wasn't totally right, but I was going to push forward. Not a good plan, by the way. But thankfully, God is long-suffering with our mistakes, and He always allows us a path to correction. So the thing that was different when I started to pursue Lisa, and I mean pursue in every sense of the word, is that she wasn't always the easiest, but definitely worth it. I truly opened myself up to God and my parents. I opened up for His leading on how to proceed. And I'm by far the most happy with that relationship and how it was conducted, even if it wouldn't have worked out. So even at 27 years old, counseling with my parents was still the right thing to do. I hear a lot of people, as soon as they turn 18, they want to get out of the house as far away from their parents as possible. Here I am, 27, looking to get into a serious relationship, and I'm asking my parents, what do you think? What should I do? How should I proceed with this? And the reason I listened, because they had invested the time into me. I knew that they cared about me, and it wasn't just a set of ideological principles that, oh, this is how you're supposed to act. I saw it every day. Now, they weren't perfect, obviously, but they did their very best. Now they tell me I'm not supposed to ask their advice. I'm supposed to ask my wife. So, but I wasn't married yet at the time. But it was really amazing to see how God took our relationship and made it into something beautiful. This is what God can do if we let Him. And through the dating process, and even more so in marriage, God has been continuing to teach me things. And it's what I think relationships are all about, especially the marriage relationship. The idea with the marriage is that we perfect one another. Iron sharpens iron, as it were. But you have to let this happen, because you can grow because of this, or you can tear each other apart, which happens many times. It all comes back to, Scott Ritzema talks about, do you have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset? Are you willing to change or be stuck in your old ways? So one of the areas that I feel like God has been working on me the most is the area of pride. And this specifically is that I don't like to be corrected. It rubs me the wrong way. Back to this whole I'm good enough process. If you're correcting me, I must have done something wrong, therefore I'm not good enough. And then It just puts me in a bad mood. But see, if you would have asked me 2 or 3 years ago if you thought I was a prideful person, I'd have told you no. I was like, no, I don't think so. I'm humble, right? I'm prideful in my humility. But I'll give you a couple examples here. My wife mentioned to me, this was a while back, when I wash my hands at the sink, I tend to do it very vigorously. And water tends to go everywhere on the mirror and the counter. And she asked me, could you not do that, or at least clean it up when you're done? I didn't like that. Just let me wash my hands. But she liked to have the sink clean. And this, thankfully, she did tell me I have been doing better. I'm not perfect yet, but it's a simple thing like that. But a couple times, I had kind of a meltdown. Like, why are you telling me to do this? Just let me wash my hands. But here's what was getting at me. This is the deeper issue here. I knew she was right, but my pride didn't want her to be right. My selfish nature wanted to push back and be the right one, because that was the ultimate goal, to be right. And probably even more so in this next scenario. Like I said, we're expecting this summer, and there was a little bit of contention with the birth plan. Now, me being in the medical world, being trained in that way, you go to the hospital, you have the baby, and then you come home, and that's all there is to it. But she wanted to go a different route, and she was wanting to have a midwife. And now, you have to understand, I was coming at it, my intentions were good. My delivery was very bad. I wanted her to be safe, and that's where my disagreement was coming from. But she was much more patient with me than I was with her. So I thank you for that, sweetie. But I didn't want to give up my idea that I was right, because I had it figured out, and I knew more than she did. So I agreed to have the midwife come meet with us and kind of talk about how that whole process works. And I'm sitting there listening to the midwife talk with us, and she made too much sense. You have to understand, I wanted this meeting to go poorly so that I could be right. But she was answering all my questions and even making me think, man, I'm stupid. Then I asked Lisa after she had left, why is it so hard to admit that you were right? It was way harder than it should have been. But God was tapping on my shoulder. He said, it's okay to be wrong. Just be willing to change and surrender your thoughts to me. That's all I asked. But it went against self. I didn't want to be wrong. Because I'm a man, and I have to be right. So what's this all boiled down to? I don't have a radical testimony. I definitely have God leading in my life, little by little. So let's boil it down. I want to give you the two biggest reasons, biggest influencing factors in my life. Firstly, it's what I saw in my parents. They lived out what they preached day to day. It didn't end at church. Now, growing up, all the kids and Pathfinders in Sabbath school, they thought my parents were the cool parents. I thought they were kind of weird, honestly. But I get it now. They spent time with us. They made fun opportunities for us. They took us on the hikes, the campouts, the Pathfinder trips. whatever I was involved in, they were involved in too, trying to make me have a good experience. And because of this, it made it much easier to hear what they had to say, even at 27 years old. They backed up what they told me with how they acted. The second is the work of the Ministry of Restoration International. The simple message of a constant surrender, moment by moment, to God in every situation. It's so simple yet so hard. We like to make it so hard sometimes. We turn it all into these theoretical discussions, but it's not so practical. We might understand justification and sanctification, but if I get upset at my wife when she tells me to clean the counter off after I just made a mess, that doesn't do me no good. We might understand who the beast power is, but can't understand the still small voice that's calling to us, saying, here's the way, walk ye in it. So it's because my parents made me the most important things in their life, and it showed. And because of that, I valued their opinion later in life. And I learned practical Christianity and how it impacts my Christian walk on a day-to-day basis. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. I am proof that that text is true. You don't have to try all the things in order to know what the right thing to do is. So many people told my parents, just wait till they're teenagers. They'll go off. Just happens. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. So I hope this has been an encouragement to some of you. But for those of you, I know I'm speaking to mostly an audience that's older to me. Here's what I want you guys to glean from my message today. When those little kids and young adults look at you, what do they see? Do they see Jesus' love in your eyes? Or do they see your judgmental attitudes and hypocrisy? I want you to pray for our young people. They need it so much. But I want you to pray mostly for yourself, that you can be the influence that they need to see. Amen. Because of the influence people have had on my life, that's why I'm here. Amen. We'll sing our closing song.